and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be the developing situation in Bangladesh. Of course, as we've seen, the Prime Minister resigning and fleeing the country. We've also, of course, seen the student protests escalating out of control, in the aftermath of which we saw the Prime Minister fleeing. And then, of course, now we have seen that there has been some sort of progress on the interim government. We have a name coming in from the presidency, which is, of course, something that the student protests have also recommended. He's a Nobel laureate, and he, of course, is somebody that the student community, the protests, want to see in the forefront. However, it remains to be seen what sort of members will be added to the interim government's list and how exactly will that take place, particularly when we see that there is a process moving forwards to a political setup quickly, but whether or not the current military setup will be allowing that for that smooth transition to exist. At the same time, of course, what is the political future of the other political parties in the country, such as the Nationalist Party? And this is, of course, something that we want to see in the coming days as to how exactly will the protests continue to influence the political setup of the country. We've seen that there have also been recommendations coming in from the leader of the protests with regards to the members of the interim government that include civil society members and, of course, members from the student community as well. So we're going to be taking a look at what that means and how this will impact the future of the politics in Bangladesh, as well as, of course, its relationship with other countries. Pakistan has given a statement of standing in solidarity with the people of Bangladesh. China is saying it's observing the situation. And, of course, there is a developing situation with India, with, of course, reports coming in that Sheikh Hassina has fled there. And then, of course, with reference to the riots within Bangladesh towards the Hindu community as well. In the aftermath, of course, we have seen that representatives of the embassies have been called back to India. So we're going to be taking a look at what this means both domestically for Bangladesh and then also in terms of its foreign relations. In our next segment, we're going to be taking a look at the developing situation in Gaza and the Middle East. We've seen, of course, that after the attacks in Iran and Lebanon, there has been quite a worry with regards to whether or not there will be a spillover and there will be an escalation of the genocide that is going on in Gaza. And, of course, in the aftermath of these attacks, we'll be expecting any follow-up attacks coming in from Iran and Lebanon, with, of course, statements coming in saying as much. At the same time, we've seen that the U.S. has been calling for de-escalation and for things to calm down, saying that it is also directly communicated the same with Iran and Israel. But it has also said that its ironclad support to Israel remains as it is, and there will be all efforts to protect Israel. At the same time, there is also concerns with regards to what is going to be the future of the peace agreement that was, of course, moving towards a ceasefire in Gaza. And now that there is a change in the representative of the Palestinian people, what exactly is going to be the way forward? What the U.S. believes is in its last stages, whether or not that is actually going to happen without any escalation between other countries in the Middle East. So that is what we're going to be focusing in our second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've been joined online by our guest for our first segment by Mr. Jauhar Saleem, who's President IRS, and Ms. Tahmina, akter, who's Advocate of Bangladesh. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion, gentlemen and ma'am. So we're going to be taking a look, of course, with reference to the situation as it develops. And Mr. Jauhar, I'm going to start with you concerning, of course, what has happened in the aftermath of which that we're experiencing right now. Given, of course, the political dynamics and history of Bangladesh, it is, of course, something that we've seen how in whatever possible way moving towards an end of the leadership that we've been seeing by Ms. Hassina and, of course, the Awami League as well. And now with the recommendations coming in from the protests and the student community being part of the interim setup, and then, of course, expecting more, as per their suggestion as well, points towards perhaps more of a structure where there is a change from political dynasties. What do you see in the current scenario in Bangladesh, and whether or not this interim setup will truly be representative of that change and will actually lead to such a political future?
Yeah, it's a massive development that we see happening in Bangladesh. Hassina Wajid had been in power for not many years now. We would recall that in 1990, prior to that, in fact, um, Hosina Wajid and Begum Khalida Zia together, they fought against the military government at the time, General Rashad. They succeeded, and when the elections were held in 1990, Khalida Zia won the election and became the first woman prime minister of Bangladesh. Subsequently, they were they were literally taking turns in power. But when Hasina Wajid came to power this time around, she established some sort of a dictatorship almost, because the opposition, those fundamental freedoms were taken away. The opposition leaders were jailed on different pretexts. Even Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate, he was sentenced for 6 months. Begum Khalida Zia was sentenced for much longer. And it was in fact in jail recently. She's been freed now. So that was, and then the election we saw, the last few elections, actually they were not even elections because the opposition was not allowed to participate in the election. The main opposition was Khalida Zia's BNP against Hasina Wajid's Awami League. So this is a massive change in that regard. So now, I think because of what was being seen in Bangladesh as a civilian dictatorship of sorts, and because of the fact that it was seen as a very pro-Indian government, and many people in Bangladesh felt that perhaps the country was gradually becoming some sort of a client state of India. And I think because of that, there was a great deal of resentment. And then recently we saw what sparked this particular movement, the student movement, was the job quotas for those people, the 30% job quotas for the people who fought in the 1971 war. And, this is something which is very interesting because Hasina Wajid, in trying to establish a personality cult, she was using that propaganda. I recall that as ambassador to Germany and Italy, we would see that whenever we would go to Bangladesh national day receptions, although the Bangladeshi ambassadors, we had very good friendships and sort of working relations with them. But despite that, in those receptions, they would distribute propaganda material, which was very much against Pakistan, which would always talk about the sort of, the genocide, the supposed genocide that took place in 1971, which is totally against any historical evidence and total contravention of facts. So that propaganda was meant to further strengthen Hasina Wajid's hold on power, and it was but it's very clear now that that propaganda was overdone, and in fact, the people of Bangladesh did not share that particular interest or those type of values, and that is why eventually we saw this revolt, which was led by the students, which resulted in the death of 400 students, but eventually led to Sheikh Hasina's ouster, and not just ouster, but her then absconding to India, which again symbolizes who was Sheikh Hasina Wajid's closest ally, or some people would call it a benefactor. So this now Muhammad Yunus, who's widely respected. I remember that we literally we grew up studying as master's students, and subsequently the microfinance movement that he started, which transformed Bangladesh in many ways. The Grameen Bank over the years loaned about $34 billion to more than 10 million people. And it was particularly these loans which were particularly focused on women empowerment. And in many ways, they really transformed the Bangladeshi society. So I think he's the right man, and the students have been calling for that. The student leaders and the General Waqar-uz-Zaman, apparently, he's accepted those, some of the key demands. And he had been sentenced, and he was in Dubai, from where he's flown back. He was sentenced just on some phony case, apparently, for violation of labor laws. And so this brings us to a new chapter. Now, let's look at the ramifications in terms of Bangladesh's foreign relations. Now, many analysts are saying that there was a great deal of resentment in Bangladesh for Bangladesh's total reliance on India in terms of its foreign policy priorities, and the fact that It was becoming sort of a client state. And we had seen many manifestations of that. I think this change, and some observers have even said that, like the Indians, I've seen some Indian analysts saying that General Waqar Zaman and some other sort of, like people who have sort of, as a result of this development, have now become more powerful. They have an inclination towards balancing Bangladesh's relations with India and China, because before there was no balance. We also have seen in the past that whenever Khaleda Zia has been in power in Bangladesh, Bangladesh's relations with Pakistan were much friendlier, much more cooperative, much more cordial, rather than whenever Hasina Wajid had been in power there. So it was like a pendulum. It would stung. It was really just the pendulum would swing either way, with the change in Bangladesh, between these two major parties since 1990. So I believe that this would also result in more balanced relations, sort of more, like more cordial relations between Pakistan and Bangladesh. Although despite Hasina Wajid's propaganda and despite rather unfriendly and sort of, very pro-India posture, Pakistan had maintained a very balanced, very nuanced position, on most issues, and had endeavored to sustain good relationship with Bangladesh because these two are like, big major countries in South Asia. They have historical linkages. They're like linkages of faith and culture and so on. So I think that would change as well, the Pakistan-Bangladesh relations. Lastly, as far as, the what future holds for Bangladesh, that we could sort of, only see in coming days. This is a good beginning, one has to say. This is a good beginning, bringing Muhammad Yunus as the head of this interim government. And we'll see as the names come up of the advisory council, what type of uh, council they bring. But given that Muhammad Yunus is heading it, I think we could expect some very sort of, like positive developments in this regard. India is not happy, naturally. Now there are already allegations emerging that, the minorities are not being treated well in Bangladesh presently. Similar concerns, have been expressed elsewhere as well. From American State Departments, there have been concerns about violence against minorities. But I think this will all subside in the coming days as the new government is sworn tomorrow, and then things would stabilize. So I hope, and this is what Pakistan hopes as well, and you've seen the statement from Mufa, that Pakistan hopes that as per the aspirations of the Bangladeshi people, they will have, a government which represents that, and the government which is positive, which is constructive, which is for Bangladesh, and a government which hopefully, from our perspective, will have a more balanced and more cooperative foreign policy.
Absolutely, and that is, of course, the hope, and we're glad to see that at least it seems to be moving in that direction. Ms. Tahmina, I also want your perspective on that, especially with regards to what we've seen in the aftermath of the protests, and of course the Prime Minister leaving. There was, of course, a demand of Mr. Yunus to come forward, and he has. And now, of course, with the interim government also taking shape, it's important to understand what the current dynamic is and how it's going to be able to sustain what is expected or demanded by the protests, and of course with reference to the kind of change that people may be looking towards. And I want your perspective in terms of your ideas about the Bangladeshi landscape and the community, and how they look at this current setup, and who exactly do you think will be part of this particular setup, and how exactly will Mr. Yunus take this direction forward?
Assalamu alaikum. You want to know about my idea about interim government? Already everybody knows our Dr. Muhammad Yunus already chief of the interim government. And another, I think maybe today I got information whole day, maybe member of my interim government, maybe 10%. And already our student, leader of the student, they give one list. And also govern our social our public leader also political leader give one list, then maybe within tomorrow morning final interim government, then tomorrow night they will take oath.
Right, absolutely. And that's great that this is the pace that things are moving towards. But as you mentioned, there are a couple of lists that are being floated. And of course, we're interested in the kind of names that will show up. Any perspective that you can give us on who can possibly make it?
And could you also help us understand how long is this interim government going to stay in power? We understand that according to the constitution, interim government can stay in power for 3 months. But if it is a promise of resetting the parameters of politics, then perhaps there would be some kind of need for a longer period.
Interim government, our country system, maximum 3 months. But just now, not yet now, not take this confirm how long they want to stay, because after a long time, this 15, 17 years, this condition in our country. So interim government, how long they want to stay, now we are not confirmed. Minimum 3 months, sometime we listen 6 months, 1 year, but situation will tell us how long they will stay. Because this is this is not only in our political leader, everything. Also, our student leader also involved this matter now. So we are giving priority student. What they want, we government, everybody want to give priority about student opinion. But they want one peaceful Bangladesh.
Yeah. Tahmina Saiba, when we obviously look at the bigger picture, of course, the today's event, yesterday's and day before yesterday's events, of course, we saw that the former Prime Minister, Hassina Wajid, she fled to India. And India is the destination she actually went into, and supposedly, of course, it is being said that her daughter was already there in New Delhi, and she is with her right now. How is this fact being accepted by the people at large of Bangladesh, and what is the mood like when it comes to, of course, the Awami League as a political party? Would we be seeing Awami League as a political party continuing as a political party in future of Bangladesh politics, or we won't see it as a political party anymore?
Yes, Ms. Tahmina.
Yet now they are silent because they are scared. Maximum political leader scared. Also, they try to hide themselves. In situation, they don't. Nobody want to take responsibility about this kind of party yet now.
Right. Can you also give us any updates? Sure. With regards to the Hindu community in Bangladesh.
Bangladesh, with regards.
Sorry. In Bangladesh, we've seen riots before, and we've also seen that India has called back representatives of its embassies. Can you give us any update on the situation on the ground?
And especially, Tahmina Saiba, of course, if we go through the statements which were coming out from Hassina Wajid's son, he was claiming that the minorities, especially the Hindus, they are being targeted. Whereas if we go through the statements coming out from the Hindu leaders themselves from Bangladesh, they were obviously giving the contrasting kind of statements in which they were saying the students are the one who are actually taking care of us, and they are making sure that nothing happens to us. It is the party of former Prime Minister that we are scared of, that they might do something to us to, of course, achieve their own goals.
About minority and everything, you know, after 17 years, government change now. Now, BMP people or civil people, everybody are suffer a long time. So they are too much angry against this Amuli former government. So sometimes some problem, but the minority, this matter totally rumor. This is totally rumor because this is very much careful. Our running army, chief of army, and also student very much serious. Our every civil citizen very much serious about minority. I saw in media something, but totally rumor. What they want to say. This is rumor totally. And student also give pressure to everywhere. Minority and this they don't want this. They never want this.
Yeah, Tahmina Sahiba, another fact which we want to highlight here through you is, of course, you are on ground, and we know so far that the police service of Bangladesh, they have gone on strike and they are not showing up. Who's taking care of the roads? Who's maintaining the peace? Who's maintaining law and order right now?
Because from last 1 month, 5 days, this problem continue. In this problem, lot of people, student and public died, and also some police. This is when constable, low-level police also died for this. But they are police. Our Bangladesh police strike for this reason. For their safety, because they are afraid. They too much kill people, students. They are afraid if they go for join this service. People can kill them, and this is for this reason they angry. They afraid. And now they continue this their strike. And today, yesterday, our IGP already changed. New IGP joined. And today, new IGP, Mr. Mainul Islam, give order within tomorrow. Everybody joined their police station and everywhere. And also now, student and Bangladesh answered, and also scout and also army take care everything.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Tahmina, for joining us and being a part of the debate and sharing your views with us. And Faisal, I'll come to you now with reference to what we've discussed, and especially in terms of what we know is happening, at least for now, in terms of the kind of engagement coming in from the student community. I want your take on how much of that will lead towards, or is real effort towards this inclusion, because of course right now there has to be that effort to engage with the protests, engage with the student community, and so of course those steps are being taken. But how real will this change be?
Yes, Sana, obviously if we talk about this episode of Bangladesh, I was astonished and amazed at the same time when I actually went through the posture of the students, not even before the change took place, after the change took place as well, because the kind of demands they had previously, and now one by one they were not even receptive towards the institution, the army military institution itself, when they came up with the idea that they will be announcing an interim setup. I mean, the students themselves said that first of all, you have to consult with us and we will give the names. And of course the military leadership, they had to accept it, and the name coming from students themselves is of that nature. Of course Muhammad Yunus is worldwide known, and it is being considered as that if he becomes of course the next leader of Bangladesh itself, he is someone who's known for taking steps that can actually lead Bangladesh to success in terms of economy, in terms of law and order, because he's the most respected one amongst them. So to me, I think the way they have been carrying all of this struggle along, they were very smart and they have played very smartly. And now when we see them in the post withdrawal of Hasina Wajid and her crew of the previous government, they are the ones, the students are the ones who are coming on the roads. They're making sure that the roads are clean. They are making sure that if there is not somebody to, of course, maintain law and order, then they are the ones who are maintaining law and order. So it means that they had the plan. And to me, I think as they are claiming that is the fresh wave of freedom they have got back to themselves. And since as it is being widely said that since more than 15 years there was this element of realization that their country was actually in the playing in the hands of India, and just because of one reason that India had a puppet prime minister called Sheikh Hasina imposed on Bangladesh, and then election after election they were rigged to keep her as Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And the kind of quota system she came up with, that was of course brought in to make sure that all of the people around her, the government machinery is being run by her own people. So it was largely becoming as one single party government, and it wasn't being considered as a democracy anymore. Rather, it was being considered as a mockery of democracy. And now when we see Bangladesh, of course we see a sense of freedom, see a sense of revolution coming out of Bangladesh.
I understand your point, and of course this is important in terms of how exactly we'll see that moving forward. But I just also like to say, Jauhar Saab, it's good to see you live in the debate. We were just looking at your picture, so thank you once again for joining us. But I'll come back to you, Ambassador Saab, in just a bit. I want Farrukh's perspective also with reference to what is going on. And Farrukh, of course, the way that we've seen things moving with Mr. Yunus coming forward is important, is positive and encouraging, and of course taking in input from the student community. But I also want to understand whether you think this will be a smooth transition, particularly with the current military rule, and then of course the way that we've seen the different political parties being involved, and whether or not their input will eventually take over.
Thank you, Sana, for the question. But you have put me in a very difficult position. Now I have to actually summarize what I had to say because Jauhar Saab is there with us. And I don't want the impression to go that dollar is waiting on penny. But what I'll do is I'll make a brief submission, then you can go to Jauhar Saab. And if we have some time at the end, I will like to come back with my conspiracy theories or whatever I've got. First of all, the good news for Bangladesh that now we have seen the contours of a caretaker government, and the man who is going to be tasked with heading it is a great name also. He is not merely a very able humanist whose contributions have been celebrated by Nobel by awarding him Nobel Prize for Peace, but also he understands economics also. And he was also on the receiving end of Sheikh Hasina's wrath, especially during the elections. He was interned for 6 months. He was traveling earlier and now he is back. So tomorrow he takes oath. After that, what happens, Sana? The Bangladeshi constitution restricts the term of any caretaker set up for 3 months. But if something has happened in India, in Bangladesh for 15 years, and one by one, brick by brick, the entire edifice of democracy was dismantled and distortions were introduced in the system, will it be enough to take care of the whole problem? I think that this caretaker setup will take more time than 3 months. And I think that it is very wise that particularly student leaders are going to be involved in the caretaker setup as well. Regarding India and the way the whole story is actually unfolding, what astonishes me is how Hasina Wajid is still confined to one air base in India. She hasn't been allowed to go out of the country. If somebody says that it is because there is this issue of image problem, that it might alienate the Bangladeshi people, humble submission is, why is it that then she was allowed to actually come to India, and why is it that she came in a military helicopter? So that would tell you that there was a kind of structure or plan to actually ease her out, and that was done. And India, doesn't seem to be trusting her too much. Another thing, if India was so shocked by the whole story, as many of our rather boisterous opinion leaders are saying, then why is it that she is not being used as a propaganda mouthpiece? And why is it that she is not wall to wall on every Indian media channel right now? So there is some complication, and we are going to actually zero in on that as well.
Right.
But frankly, one more thing. The core of the movement was totally organic. We know that the student leaders came out and they were very, very well managed. Doesn't mean it did not become a big tent or a movement. And when big tent movement actually starts, then a lot of elements are there. We are going to further talk about that after Ambassador Jauhar Sahib.
We're actually short on time, so we're going to be going to the next segment when we go to the ambassador. So if you want to add something, the time is now.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm going to then add another day.
All right. Ambassador Saab, we're going to take your perspective on the next segment as well. We're talking about the Gaza situation and, of course, the possibility of this actually escalating with different countries involved, especially, of course, Iran and Lebanon, with the way that we have seen the attacks in both countries by Israel. We've seen the U.S. Calling for de-escalation. We have seen them saying that we are very, very close to a ceasefire arrangement. But at the same time, we've also seen them saying that their support to Israel remains ironclad and they will defend it. So I want your perspective in terms of how you see the current situation, whether or not there is actually a possibility of a ceasefire soon, and whether or not Iran and Lebanon will actually go ahead without a retaliatory attack.
Yeah, unfortunately, the situation has further complicated in that region. What we see in Gaza was Hania's death has brought in Yahya Sinwar as the leader of Hamas. Hania was considered a relative moderate. Yahya Sinwar is more of a hardliner compared to his predecessor. So we have to see how that impacts upon the negotiations going on between the Israelis and Hamas, which are being mediated by the Americans in collaboration with the Egyptians and the Qataris. Because the Americans have been saying, we have statements on record, President Biden himself, Matthew Miller, and other high officials, that they're very, very close to an agreement. In fact, they were saying that the basic framework of the agreement has been agreed in principle by both sides. Now, basically, now it's the details which are being filled up. Just to recall, it was going to be a three-phase ceasefire. First is like 6 weeks temporary ceasefire, during which, first they were supposed to release half of the hostages, and then in the second stage, which was to be negotiated then, there was just going to be some sort of an interim setup and so on. But those negotiations, when it was felt that they were very close to fruition, which the Americans claimed, and even the Israelis had not really disputed those claims, or the Palestinians. But the death of Ismail Hania, I think it has complicated that situation. On top of that, the death of Fuad Shakr and the tense relations once again between Iran and Israel. We know, like after the strike at the Iranian embassy, there was retaliation by Iran when 300 projectiles were launched, although they didn't really cause any human losses, but that was a show of show of strength in terms of retaliation, at least. So the situation at that time would de-escalated. But I would also add that a lot of diplomacy was in place by the Americans since the very inception of this conflict, since the 7th October. Initially, the Americans ensured by that intense diplomacy that the conflict did not widen, so that Hezbollah did not join the conflict, that Iran did not join the conflict. You would recall that they even moved their naval assets to they strengthened their naval assets in the region and precluded that possibility. They succeeded in that. Now, once again, we see, and then in between, there have been situations when there were fears and concern that this would get widened, this would get more escalation. But somehow, the American shuttle diplomacy, which has been conducted ever since, we would also recall that American Secretary of State Blinken, he visited multiple times, 7, 8, 9 times. He visited the region, and he had parleys with all the leaderships, of the countries directly or indirectly involved, and that helped. But now we are in a situation where Iran has promised retaliation, but I think they were very careful in saying they would be at the time and place of their choosing. Many, we would also, I think we could also note that the Fateh, the Mahmoud Abbas, he came up with some very wise words. He called for the need of patience, strategic patience, so to speak, by the Iranians and others involved, because he felt that if the situation escalates and if the conflict widens, the ultimate sufferers would be the Palestinians, because it suits Netanyahu. Netanyahu is totally besieged politically within Israel. There are the court cases against him, and then there's very strong protests going on. He has lost the support of the people there. But he's trying to use this conflict to garner support, and to just survive in power at any cost. And that ruthlessness has resulted in 40,000 deaths, and these in recent times what we've seen, these strikes which to assassinate the top leaderships, which makes the situation more serious, but it suits Netanyahu. So I think the situation is unfortunately pregnant with very many possibilities, which are not all very positive. So we can only hope that these ceasefire negotiations, they result in what is intended, and there is a ceasefire, and also that Hezbollah and Iran, they do not really go for actions which would further widen the conflict, which is not good for the Palestinian people, which is not good for the region, and which would not be good for the world, which already stands very polarized.
Absolutely.
Because of.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion and sharing your views for both segments. And Faisal, I want your take quickly on the situation.
Yeah, obviously, Sana, we have been talking about this, that there was a sort of window for negotiations, window for peace deal, which I think just because of one man's tyranny, Netanyahu's tyranny, it is being missed. And that window was that right after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. Ismail Haniyeh was someone who was considered as the political figure with whom they could have the best possible talks when it comes to peace. But of course, losing that window, and even post-assassination, they had that window open, and it would have been possible for all of the stakeholders to sit down again and of course negotiate peace for the remaining sufferings of the people at large of Gaza. But that doesn't seem to be possible right now, and the only reason behind it is that this Netanyahu, his design is of course to save himself, and the only way to save himself is to of course keep this igniting and keep this going, and the genocide which he's up to is to be completed by himself, and he wants to make it possible. And to me, I think in coming days we might see further actions in that region, and that action is of course not in the favor of humanity at large, but we can only hope that somehow sanity can prevail, and that sanity can of course make sure that the human cost is lesser and lesser.
Right, absolutely. Farrukh, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say what window of opportunity. I mean, assassinations don't actually create windows of dialogue. They create, bad taste in mouth, and that's why so much aggression. And that's why the US seems to be trying to contain the reaction to Israel's aggression, and that is known. But the problem is that when it comes to the monitor, or the guy who is supposed to be the policeman, they seem to have favorites, right? When it comes to Israel, they don't seem to contain Israel's aggression. But then they actually want to ensure that the reaction to that aggression is controlled. Although I'm not for escalation, I believe that such escalations should not take place. I am for the peaceful resolution of this situation, especially in Gaza, where things have really been horrible for the locals, for the Gazans. But having said that, this tilted worldview where one side gets away with whatever they want, and even then their leader, who is now a war criminal, can parade in a country like parade around or prowl around in a country like the US, and while the other countries are harassed. That is unfair, and I don't think that in coming days it is going to resolve anything.
Right, thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. As always, that's all that we have from the show today. We'll now see you tomorrow.